right, we are live. Welcome back, everybody, to the Fantasy Golf Bag Podcast. This will be the U.S. Open week. We are finally here, and we'll be previewing the Oakmont Country Club. Some changes from the last time they played it here back in 2016, obviously. So we will talk through the golf course. The additional shows this week, we have a bunch of content in store, so some special guests scheduled this week, which is exciting. So Showdown shows using our EAP data every Showdown slate this week, so that's exciting. And then for our preview show, so this will just be a course preview, looking at the golf course, the data from the golf course from 2016 and what we expect this year. And then the second shows, we do a Combo IQ show for pro members. We'll also do a player, not a player by player, but a player highlight show, we'll call it. So with that being said, it's officially U.S. Open week, so let's talk about it. We got a couple cool tools. So a little background on the 2016 U.S. Open. So we're limited in some of the specific data. So like for Spectrum data, we won't have that available for the U.S. Open back in 2016 when Dustin Johnson won it at 4 under par. I think it was 4 under par. But we have a lot of other tools, actually, or one other tool that we're going to focus on. Obviously, the Course Preview Pro has a majority of the data that I would typically look at on any given week, but it is limited due to the data available from 2016. So we're going to do a few additional looks in our time machine, looking back to the 2016 U.S. Open, which will be pretty revealing for the types of players that fared pretty well. We'll be looking at the top 10 and the top 25 back in 2016. So the main updates here, the course par is still 70. The yardage is updated, so it's not 72.19 that it shows here from 2016. It is actually 73.72. So they added 150 yards or so. I think hole 8. Is it hole 8? Yeah, they got it tipped out at 289. So on the scorecard, it's showing us 289. We'll see how many rounds they actually played at that. And like we talk about every week, like the scorecard yardage is typically like all the way tipped out, and they rarely would ever play it completely tipped out. It would be kind of stupid. So the scorecard will be 73-72. It'll probably play closer to 72.50 on any given day. So that'll be the estimate for the yardage. Par 70 still. This is the look back at the 2016 hole by hole stuff. So, I mean, obviously played very difficult. Some of these holes are like half a shot over par. So number 1 played half a shot over par. Number 9, number 15.4. So we'll just kind of round up. A couple holes played close to par or just under, which is nice. So the par 5s, number 4 played just under, and the par 5 12 actually played over par. Hole 13 played just under par, and hole 14 as well. In hole 17, the drivable hole is 0.12 under par. Everything else is pretty much hold on to your seat. Pretty difficult. We'll see what the rough is. They say, it's going to be 4.5, 5 inches. They say the stem meter is going to be 14.5. Like, we'll see. Like, if it's really going to be 14.5, these greens are pretty severe, and it's going to be pretty tough. So we'll see what the scoring shakes out this year. And if the rough does stay up that high, they should. It's not overly long. There's a few holes that are very long, obviously, but we kind of need the rough to keep it down, keep the scoring down a little bit. And we'll see how they do with the greens. It's been pretty wet, and I think it's supposed to rain Monday and Tuesday as well. So that might play into it a little bit in terms of distance, playing a little bit longer than even the, my first interpretation, playing under 7,300 yards. This is from 2016. The average par 3, 224, average par 4, 423, average par 5, 620. Looking at a couple of the key stats from that year, and like I said, we'll talk about the time machine here in just a second, which is probably the most revealing for the course fit or profile fit for the course. The cut line was +6. Average winning score was 4 under par because we only have 1 year. Driving accuracy down at 56%. We do have the penalty stats, which is pretty nice. So like the driving accuracy at 56.1%, missed fairway penalty, almost half a shot. So that's like in line with Bay Hill. If you think about Bay Hill being very penalizing off the tee as far as hitting in the rough, that's kind of in the same ballpark. Honestly, I think Sawgrass played close to that this year. So that's good. Like, honestly, if you want guys having to hit fairways, the driving accuracy being down and missed fairway penalty up means it was difficult to hit fairways. So those can kind of be inverse. We don't have the left rough and right rough tendency. Totally fine. Green regulation rate, 56.8%, down a little bit off the tour average, which makes sense. The driving accuracy is down, tougher greens to hit, longer approaches. Missed green and regulation penalty, very high. Obviously, scrambling is difficult. And just looking at this, it's 3/4 of a shot, but like if we're just talking round numbers, like missing a green almost costs you a full shot to the field. So hitting greens are very important. Hitting fairways is very important. The green and regulation from the fairway is 72.8%. So you can see that's just under the tour average. That's still pretty high. So like hitting the fairways is actually a big advantage considering the field, hit 56% of fairways. The green and regulation from the rough is down under 40%, which is to be expected. With the thick rough, scrambling down quite a bit, difficult greens, the rough being up. I mean, all that kind of goes hand in hand with being pretty difficult to get up and down. The greens are somewhat diabolical in some of the spots. Like you'll see, I watched some of the 2016 highlights. I think they have the entire final round on the USGA app. So I would encourage you guys to check that out if you have some free time. It is pretty interesting watching guys like, who was that? Andrew Landry, Lee Westwood kind of spit the bit right off the bat. Same with Aaron Badley. He teed off with, I think that might have been the previous US Open. I can't remember. He started with like a double bogey from the middle of the fairway. But yeah, scrambling around these greens, like guys will be green side, pin high in 2, and then chip it off the green. And then the next shot is not any easier. So it's very difficult. I think Lee Westwood did that on hole 2 or hole 3 in the final round. So keep an eye out for scrambling. Definitely at a thick rough. That's going to be important for sure. Birdie or better down quite a bit, 12.3%. It's 8% less than the tour average. So an average PGA Tour event, you're looking at 20% birdie rate. Obviously not a ton of birdies here. You can kind of see that by the hole by hole. Hole 4 and hole 17 are really the two decent opportunities. So not a lot of birdies to be had. We're talking like, 1 to 2 birdies per round, which is kind of crazy to say. Bogey or worse, obviously going to be higher with the green regulation rate, driving accuracy rate, and the scrambling rate. So you're looking at a 30% bogey or worse. Pretty high. So with that being said, of course, good start to the week. The course comparisons doesn't have the data that we would typically show here for the distributions or the strokes gain data, which is more for show anyways. Like I've talked about every week, the strokes gained at an event is kind of reflective of the course in that event, not predictive of what does well at that golf course. So sometimes there's some crossover there, but a lot of times what you see is the profile for players that do well at a certain course doesn't always match up to what the golf course allows. You'll see that on golf courses where, there's not much to gain off the tee. Guys that gain a lot off the tee still do really well. Typically approach is probably the best carryover, but that kind of applies to every golf course on the PGA Tour. Around the green, maybe a little bit, and it really depends on the surface. And then putting is, I don't want to say it's volatile, but you'll see where like if you make the cut to finish in the top 25 takes an extra 1.5 shots gain putting, and then to finish in the top 10 is another 1.5 shots putting. So like there's definitely importance to putting just for that week. Doesn't mean that putting is like an important stat all of a sudden. So just keep that in mind as we look at the golf course, and honestly every week when we're handicapping the PGA Tour, the statistics that are broken out by strokes gained for an event is not predictive. Like in the next year as we go into that event, it just tells you what's available to be gained on the field. It does not always match up to the profile for the players. So what we can do though, first one up is past winners, obviously, we always have the last 10 winners here in the Fantasy Golf Bag Course Preview Pro. So with just DJ here for 2016 in the last 10 years, we have all of his lead-in stats for his prior 24 rounds. So you can see that right off the bat. But we are going to jump into the time machine so we can see, a bigger sample of players and what they brought to that week. So obviously looking at like the finishes, it's pretty indicative. Like whoever gained the most green regulation is going to do pretty well. Of course, Henrik Stenson, WD, DJ Trahan missed the cut, but you got DJ was third in green regulation. And technically he was one if you take out Trahan missing the cut, only 2 rounds, and Henrik Stenson WDing. So like DJ, number 1 in greens, won the event. Then we got T23 for Chris Wood, Matt Kuchar, T46, Jason Duffner, T8, a couple missed cuts there, and then a T2 for Furyk, T13, T32, T37, T5. So like green regulation aligns pretty closely. Doesn't get much closer than that, to be honest. We have driving accuracy you can sort by. And again, this is just looking at that event. It's not a predictive, analysis. Driving accuracy is kind of all over the place. You'll see a lot of missed cuts, not a ton of great finishes, which is interesting. Like driving accuracy is probably something people will talk about this week. And like I said, I think it will be important, but there's other factors that is going to go into that for sure. And then driving distance is always the other interesting one. DJ led the field in driving distance, won the event. Aaron Wise was second, missed the cut. Tony Finau was fourth, missed the cut. Smiley Kaufman was sixth, missed the cut. So it's kind of all over the place with the driving distance. But fortunately, we do have the time machine that we can go back and look. But we can quickly summarize, DJ came into the event in 2016 with some really good form. He was losing some strokes around the green, but otherwise was gaining quite a bit. I mean, he was gaining 2 strokes tee to green, which is great. He was gaining over a stroke off the tee. So that's kind of check mark 1 in your memory bank for looking at this week's stats. Approach gaining almost a full shot, 0.75 is pretty good. And then he was also gaining strokes putting. So we'll look at the time machine and see if that's a trend with other players that finished in the top 10 as well. But all in all, DJ was playing really good golf as he headed into 2016. So like kind of not a surprise for him to have a good finish. And then obviously winning is kind of icing on the cake. You can do the driving accuracy numbers. A couple of the basic stats are in here. I think putting is, we do have 3 putt avoidance. Kind of look at that. About the same, not drastically different off the tour average. And then down here is the hole by hole for missed fairway penalty, missed green regulation, and distance. So let's look at the time machine because that's what you're all here for anyways. We'll pull that up. All right. So for the Fantasy Golf Bag members, they're accustomed to this, and you can kind of go through every year for a course and look at the lead-in stats for the top finishers. You can go through the whole field if you want to. Everybody that missed the cut, made the cut, top 25, top 10, or top 5. And it gives you a really good indication of like what type of profile was, fared the best that week. So some weeks, like the American Express, there's almost nothing correlated with success at the American Express, which is frustrating, but is what it is. Like a very volatile, low-scoring event. Guys can find it or just kind of piece it together and do okay. On the difficult golf course, we see ball striking obviously stands out quite a bit. But the things I'm more focused on is like, is it more of an off-the-tee profile? Even if that's not a stat that you can gain a lot of strokes in the event. Same with approach, putting, etc. So what we have, this is all of the lead-in stats that we typically provide. So on like the winner card, we just looked at DJ. It has all the strokes gained stats that we would look at for lead-in form. It also has the traditional stats. We have relative driving accuracy and driving distance. Same for green regulation and proximity. We also have birdie or better and bogey or worse, and that's all relative to the field. So it's not a raw number. That is DJ gaining 7.2% more birdies than the field in the events he's been playing. So let's focus on the top 5 to start with. This is a pretty small sample of like lead-in form players to look at, but we can kind of expand this. So it's easier if we split it up into top 5, then top 10, top 25, just because it gets kind of a busy chart. So the cool thing we have is down at the bottom, we have a quick average of those finishers. And you can see right off the bat, everything in all of these buckets is green. So strokes gained tee to green, strokes gained total, strokes gained off the tee. All these other ones are positive. All these players brought in positive strokes gained tee to green for their top 5 finish. Jim Furyk losing a little bit off the tee due to his distance, kind of an outlier. Like I could argue his performance at Oakmont in 2016 was a little bit of an outlier, especially considering he's losing 11 yards per round against the field in driving distance. Not something you would think would do well, but he had a great final round. I forget what he shot, but he was lights out. He had a chance to tie or be a pretty good clubhouse leader fairly early on Sunday, to be honest. But that's all to say, going through this, you can quickly see, okay, who finished best and what did they have going into it? DJ was gaining 2 strokes tee to green. Shane Lowry gaining almost a stroke tee to green. Scott Piercy was even gaining a quarter of a shot tee to green. We got Brandon Grace 1.5 and Sergio Garcia, just over a half. Then we can break it out by off the tee and approach. So like off the tee to me is the biggest factor right off the bat. So like approach to, we'll say, 4 of the 6 that finished in the top 5 were gaining on approach, but there's much more of an indication of strokes gained off the tee being kind of the feeder for a good finish at Oakmont. As we talk about all the time, like strokes gained off the tee and strokes gained approach are, well, I should say strokes gained approach goes hand in hand with off the tee. It's typically easier to gain. You have more opportunity to gain strokes you have more opportunity to gain strokes on approach when you're losing strokes off the tee than guys like DJ, Bryson, Brooks in his heyday. When guys are gaining a bunch of strokes off the tee, you have a different baseline, and typically it's harder to keep up with that baseline the better your off the tee numbers are. So you can see this off the tee looks fantastic. I mean, these guys are all gaining over a quarter of a shot. We'll kind of round Scott Piercy up, except for Furyk, which we just talked about. Approach, mostly positive. Piercy was losing a little bit, and Shane Lowry was losing a little bit in 12 rounds and 22 rounds. So not terrible. Strokes gained off around the green. DJ was losing a little bit. We looked at that for the lead-in card for the winner. We got Furyk, Lowry, and Brandon Grace gaining a good bit. So we'll look at the top 10s in a second. Maybe around the green is something to consider this week for a lead-in form stat. Strokes gained putting, all over the place. We got guys losing, Scott Piercy losing 0.3, Shane Lowry losing 0.2, and we got DJ and Brandon Grace gaining 0.4. So kind of not much I can really assert from a strokes gained putting number as a lead-in form statistic. Like when we're trying to build a player profile or a course fit, so far it really looks like off the tee is the biggest chunk. Approach, as always, every week, another big chunk. And then around the green looks like it could be something. We'll look at it here when we look at the top 10. Driving accuracy, driving distance. Honestly, people are going to talk about driving accuracy this week. And the guys that came in leading or came in with the best finishes didn't have anything crazy as far as driving accuracy. I'll say you could probably weight this a little bit, but like the driving distance is pretty moderate as well. So the guys that are gaining a little bit more in distance are losing a little bit in accuracy, kind of makes sense. And then Furyk, who's gaining a little bit more in accuracy, is losing a little bit more distance. It kind of goes hand in hand. So those two stats, if you hear that around the industry this week, I don't think either one of those holds a tremendous amount of weight. They, like I said, they go hand in hand. Guys that hit it farther typically hit less fairways. Guys that hit it shorter have to hit more fairways, or they're just really finding another job soon. All right. Green regulation rate, all positive. It looks really good, actually. So the relative green regulation rate, the worst player was Shane Lowry, just over 1% less than the field. Everybody else is pretty strong, 2%, 3%, 7%. So I like the green and regulation number right there. Proximity, not terrible. Pretty much field average for everybody except for DJ and Furyk, who are gaining a little bit. So maybe proximity is something you would look at. That might be something you add into your the approach IQ tool. We look at proximity a little bit with approach, and we kind of weight those together. And then the last two, and then we'll look at the top 10. Birdie or better and bogey or worse. Not much on the birdie or better, which typically I would argue, and I have argued that, birdie or better on tough golf courses is typically pretty good. And it might be just a coincidence that DJ was one of the best birdie or better players at that time, and he won at Oakmont. But this is pretty spread out. Like Furyk's not making a ton of birdies. He's making less bogeys. Sergio, Brandon Grace, making more birdies, making more bogeys, or making less bogeys. So that's good. It does look like bogey or worse is pretty indicative of success here right off the bat. So that's the top 5. Let's kind of round it into the top 10 and see if that continues. So the first 2 that we'll look at, we won't go through every single one because we just kind of highlighted them all for the top 5. Off the tee kind of continues to see the same trend, right? All these guys, there's a few outliers, like Kevin Na losing strokes on off the tee and approach. Zach Johnson losing a little bit off the tee, like Kevin Na's a big time outlier in this scenario. But Jason Duffner, Jason Day, Brandon Gray, Sergio, Shane Lowry, as we go back up the board, all these guys were gaining a considerable amount of shots off the tee. And in fact, the top 10 was averaging over a quarter of a shot gained off the tee for their lead in form. Approach is pretty much in the same bucket. Jason Duffner was gaining quite a bit. So that kind of offsets a little bit of the negative from Kevin Na, but still, over a quarter of a shot gained on approach lead in as an average. Most of these guys are gaining over a quarter of a shot or half a shot. Around the green is kind of mediocre. I think around the green is probably very important this week, and I would weight it a minute amount. Like I think there's enough to say if you do bump up around the green, you potentially could rule out a few guys or bump them down a little bit further than they deserve to be. So just keep an eye on around the green. I do think it's an important thing to consider, but don't go overboard with around the green. And then putting is pretty much negligent. I think Jason Day, Daniel Summerhays, and then everybody else is right around even for strokes gained putting. So I think, unfortunately, because it's going to be boring, but it's going to be another ball striking, which is great. We want that versus like a putting contest. So yeah, that makes sense. Driving accuracy, again, kind of goes hand in hand. Nothing really to write home with accuracy for the finishers or driving distance. So I don't think either of those is independently valuable for our research this week. Green regulation is still pretty good. A couple guys, like we talked about, Kevin Na being abnormally bad and then finished well here. Zach Johnson was losing a little bit green regulation. Everybody else was pretty strong, honestly, in their green regulation rate. So never hurts to apply green regulation. Proximity is a little bit more spread out. I probably wouldn't even bother with it as you go down the board. It does look like it's a good tie break or a decent small bump. Like I said, you can use it in our approach IQ tool and just kind of weed out the really bad finishers, but I don't think it's going to hold that much weight. So I wouldn't worry too much about proximity. And like realistically, if you think about trying to apply their form into a course like Oakmont, the lead-in form for proximity probably doesn't have as much of a carryover, but green regulation definitely does. Like guys aren't going to be hitting it that close. They're going to be hitting it further away, and an extra 2 feet or fewer 2 feet isn't going to make a big difference from like 42 feet. All right, birdie or better. It looks a little bit more what I would expect. So like in a major, the best players tend to make more birdies in the field anyways. This is what I would expect. So yeah, birdie or better is definitely something I would bake into anything you're researching in the stat model this week. And then bogey or worse, I think, is also obviously to be included. those go hand in hand with strokes gained total, to be completely honest. So I think sometimes people can overweight them and they're double counting a bit too much, but certainly something to look at and, avoid the really bad bogey or worse guys and the really bad birdie or better guys, except for Jim Furyk. All right. Let's see. We can do top 25 really quick and just kind of quickly scan it. So again, we're just kind of focused on off the tee. And as we go down for the finishers, you can see that kind of continues. David Lingmerth, Brooks Koepka, Andrew Landry, shockingly, was gaining off the tee. Graham McDowell. Got Oosthuizen, Schwartzel. I mean, off the tee is pretty massive. Approach, definitely include it. It's not as massive. I would honestly weight off the tee slightly more in this scenario. When looking through this, like there's opportunity for guys to overlook guys that may not have been excelling in approach, but it does look like off the tee is a pretty strong. I mean, it's a lot of green for off the tee for lead and form. Around the green continues to be kind of all over the place. So again, something to look at. I wouldn't bake it too high. And then we'll go into the other categories really quick for the bottom sections, which we just talked about the top guys. Kind of all over the place again. Driving accuracy down and driving distance up, not much. So like I would mostly ignore any driving distance numbers. I would mostly ignore any driving accuracy numbers, because there's a lot of guys here that were losing strokes or losing accuracy against the field, driving accuracy against the field, and they did pretty well that week. So they just kind of cater to the golf course. So yeah, I think driving accuracy is kind of a silly stat to really consider this week. Green regulation, let's see. Stays pretty consistent. Andy Sullivan. I mean, most of these guys were gaining a good bit. There's a few outliers again. Sung Kang, Chris Wood, a couple of the European guys. I guess that's the other tricky part of this week, is baking in some of the European numbers. So yeah, I think green regulation is such a staple every week. It's similar to strokes gained approach or spectrum approach if you're using our spectrum data. And then birdie or better, bogey or worse looks to be pretty consistent. So lastly, we can do a field. And we can just sort by off the tee and quickly look at the best finishers for each of those statistics. So, Rory gained the most off the tee leading into that event, finished 75th. DJ won it, being number 2. Justin Rose, we got Brooks Koepka 13th. Pretty good. Let's do this actually. Let's say the average is 0.14. So let's just look at everybody above. And it won't let me do a numerical filter. Perfect. So kind of just want to focus on the above average guys. We can look at approach really quick. Approach looks pretty good. Not some really top finishes up top. Hideki missed the cut. Pretty rough going there. But there's some good finishes. Adam Scott, Jason Duffner, a couple 37ths. DJ's up there. Graham McDowell. But I really do like the look of the off the tee numbers. I mean, that's outside of Rory and Justin Rose and Ricky Fowler. All these guys, 13th, 32nd, 23rd, 15th, 23rd, 37th, 5th, 12th, 8th. Off the tee looks pretty good. We can go down through green regulation as well. A few good ones and a few kind of mediocre finishes. So I still think it's something to consider, but don't go overboard. Proximity, just to peek at it. Let's see. We want the negatives. Proximity is actually not terrible. Lee Westwood's rough final round, 32nd. DJ was 2nd. Andy Sullivan, 23rd, 12th, 8th. So proximity is probably not the worst thing to bake in. We'll look at birdie or better really quick. Pretty good. Like, there's always going to be outliers. Rory obviously being one of the big ones. Jason Day, DJ, all these guys were in like the top 10 in each of those buckets and finished in the top 5 or top 10. Sergio down here. Been on. Gregory Birdie. And then quickly we'll look at bogey or worse. And it's a negative again. So we'll go down here. Again, pretty spread out. Not terrible. I think including birdie or better and bogey or worse is definitely valuable. So we can kind of simplify everything into looking at off the tee approach. Like I said, we'll have a combo IQ video up, so we'll nail down the actual driving distributions that you can use in the like driving IQ this week, which will be pretty good. I'd like to see, some of these guys driving accuracy numbers with the strokes gained off the tee, kind of model it together for those specific driving distances. And then obviously we can bake in missed fairway penalty pretty high because it's going to be quite high this week. And the same with approach IQ. Get a good look at the actual approach distributions and then looking at spectrum approach and then trying to get a model up of all those approach numbers broken out. So that is the plan this week. All right. I think that'll do it. We're at 30 minutes, just over 30 minutes. That's pretty good. But hopefully that helped. Honestly, lead in form is just kind of an underserved topic these days. Like every course is a little bit unique. And looking at guys that are coming in, playing different courses, different fields, all that kind of goes hand in hand. So looking at what their form was going into an event more so than what that course gave up. So hopefully this helped. As always, you can find that at fantasygolfbag.com. It's under the Pro Tools. You can go down to TimeMachine. We got everything else up as well for the U.S. Open. So you can hop into the Course Preview Pro, the player profiles, the IQ tools, lineup IQ, do our sims if you want. Projections will be up on Tuesday, as well as the ownership. So you can run all of your lineups and simulations. And as always, we have our custom sims up. So if you want to run some tournament sims and see who is going to be winning and see what kind of edge you can find in the outright market, that is up as well. It also sims out DK projections and FanDuel projections, which is pretty cool. So with that being said, guys, I would encourage you to check out fantasygolfbag.com. We'll be in the Discord all week, and keep an eye out for the second video this week for the player analysis, player research show. And then for the pro members, we'll have the combo IQ, and then we'll have our showdown slates up all weekend using our new lineup IQ sims as well. So best of luck this week for the U.S. Open. Pretty exciting. We'll see how the course holds up with all the rain the next couple days. Hopefully one of you guys ships a Millie Maker. That would be nice. All right, guys. Best of luck. Enjoy the rest of your evening into the next week, into Monday, and let's have a great U.S. Open. See ya.